Welcome to the Dr. Laurie Marbas podcast, where she interviews experts in health and science, sharing their expertise so you can live your healthiest life. This episode of the podcast is proudly sponsored by Fit Vegan Coaching, the world's leading whole food, plant-based body recomposition program for Gen X and baby boomers. Founded by Maxime, whose personal journey began after losing his ex-fiancée to breast cancer, Fit Vegan Coaching is on a mission to disease-proof the world through the transformative power of plant-based eating and fitness. This program is the Rolls-Royce of plant-based coaching, offering all-inclusive services, personalized plans, world-class accountability, lifelong support, and more. Say goodbye to the yo-yo dieting and embrace a lasting transformation that will rev up your metabolism even post-transformation. Ready to take charge of your health and vitality? Head over to fitvegan.ca, that's fitvegan.ca, and mention Dr. Laurie for exclusive bonus savings when you sign up. Don't miss this opportunity to join the movement towards a healthier, fitter, and more vibrant you. This episode of the podcast is proudly sponsored by The Healing Kitchen, your path to vibrant health. Immerse yourself in the transformative program, guided by the combined expertise of myself, Dr. Laurie Marbas, and Chef Brittany Giroudi, who has lost 70 pounds on a whole food plant-based diet. Here's what's in store for you. Virtual weekly sessions. Engage in an immersive 60-minute virtual session every single week, where you'll delve into the world of wholesome plant-based goodness right from your own kitchen. Cooking with Brittany the first half hour. Unleash your inner chef as you're captivated by Chef Brittany Giroudi's culinary mastery that will delight your taste buds and nourish your body. Medical Q&A with Dr. Laurie the last half hour. Prioritize your well-being during the second half hour. I will personally address your medical inquiries, providing evidence-based insights and personalized advice, empowering you to make informed choices for your health. So join us on the Healing Kitchen to help you step into a healthier and most vibrant future. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Dr. Laurie Marbas, and today I'm very excited to welcome back Robert Cheeke. How are you today?
Laurie, I am doing fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. Good to be back again.
Yes, and it's fun to talk about this book. It's a little bit different than your previous books, which were based on either fitness or brand building, like you mentioned in the ebook. So this is your fifth physical copy or book in print, correct?
Yeah, that's right. 2010 was my first book that came out. And so we're, almost 15 years later. So I guess I've got one about every 3 years or so on average.
That's a good cadence that you still have a long life ahead of you. So we can expect at least, 30, 40 more books.
Yeah, and I expect to write many more. I don't know about 30 more, but I've got a few more in my head already. So
that's great.
Tackling those soon.
Well, that is fantastic. Well, let's talk about your new book, The Impactful Vegan, which is a very interesting and intriguing title. Can we get to why you decided to write this book in particular, and at least at this point in time in your life too? Because if you can maybe just give your story a little bit and then how it came into this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm in my 29th year as a plant-based athlete. Became vegan for the animals back in 1995, grew up on a farm, raised animals, sold them at the auction to be turned into someone's meal. And so I've been working as a vegan athlete in one capacity or another. I was a runner in college and then a bodybuilder for a decade, became a champion bodybuilder. That gave me the platform to write books like Vegan Bodybuilding and Fitness and Plant-Based Muscle and the New York Times bestseller, The Plant-Based Athlete, along with my co-author, Matt Frazier. And I've been doing this lifestyle for a long time, focused on being effective for the cause. Like that was really my goal. I mean, way back in 1995, that was the goal, was to show people that you could build your body on a plant-based diet without animal protein, and hopefully that would inspire others to do the same. That was pre-internet, before most of us had the internet at home. That was me trying to make a difference in my community, growing up in Western Oregon and Corvallis, and wanting to have an impact. And so that's what I set out to do. And I did all my touring and traveling and speaking the last 20 years or so. And then I was here in Colorado, and I was over at the Boulder bookstore and I was looking for a Peter Singer book. I was actually looking for Animal Liberation. They didn't have it, but they had the book, The Most Good You Can Do. And that was my introduction to effective altruism. Never heard of it. After reading that book, I read Will McCaskill's book, Doing Good Better. And then I read other books on the subject and realized that I've basically been living this, effective altruism lifestyle my entire adult life, dating back to my early years of veganism and perhaps even before that. And so I was harvesting walnuts back at the farm I grew up on in Oregon, which I do every fall. And I was under these walnut trees by myself, picking up walnuts 8 hours a day, without music, without podcasts, headphones, just me out in nature thinking day after day. And that's when I realized that, you know what? I want to take these effective altruism principles, which are basically doing the most good for others, and trying to measure that and quantify it, and using our skills and talents and strengths and resources in order to do the most good. And I wanted to apply that to farmed animals. And that's when I got the idea. I was on the farm I grew up on. When I got that idea, I immediately went to work, started writing it. This is 2021, I believe. And now here we are, a couple of years later, and The Impactful Vegan is out in bookstores in June 25th, 2024. So that was the really quick summary of the last 29 years that got me to this point of writing about how to most effectively help animals.
Well, that is very thoughtful and well done as far as, summarizing 3 decades of a life and the evolution of a book idea. So can we get a little bit deeper into what you kind of got I think the glancing top part of what really is effective vegan altruism, because I think we understand what altruism is, or maybe we don't. Maybe even just go back even further to the basic definition of what altruism is, and maybe how there's some examples that people can see that they're already doing in their own life and get an idea of what that looks like in day-to-day living.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Laurie. So altruism is basically doing good for others without expecting anything in return, without hoping or expecting or trying to benefit from generosity. It's authentic, it's genuine, and it's a sincere desire to help others, not waiting until, I don't know, someone asks you for help, or waiting until the holidays where it's kind of like, okay, it's a giving season, I'll give to this person or that person or this organization. But it's a mindset that everyone deserves an opportunity. And some of us have more than others. And if we can share with others to lift others up and give them something, some resource, some hope, some support that helps lift them up, that helps increase the quality of their life, I feel like we have somewhat of an obligation to do that. That's the altruistic approach, is that, think of it in creating a nonprofit organization, or creating a company or a brand, or creating an identity. It's saying, I want to help others. I don't need even to be thanked. I don't need to be given something in return. I don't even need this to be reciprocated. Like, if I support you, Laurie, I don't necessarily need you or expect you to support me in return, even though I've done something, let's say, to support you. It's designed to be generous in nature. And I've always been that way. I don't know exactly where it comes from. I assume part of it is through DNA. I think my mother is a lot like that. I think the environment I grew up in is like that. Maybe coming from a farming background, maybe coming from a small town, maybe coming from particular teachers. But it's always been inherent within me, but it's also something that can be learned and that can be practiced. So altruism is basically authentic giving. So, but then effective altruism is about how to do the most good with your giving. So let's say if we're talking about a monetary donation or contribution, for example, which some of this is based on that financial donations, not everything, of course. And there's completely other ways to use your skills and talents and network and resources and your volunteering and all these other things that don't cause you to have to open up your wallet. But when we're talking about open up our wallets to give to organizations, there are some organizations that are dozens of times more effective than others. Some are hundreds times more effective than others. Some are even thousands times more effective than others. And this is laid out very, very clearly by Peter Singer, Will McCaskill, Nick Cooney, and others when they're especially measuring organizations that help reduce human poverty, for example. If you're trying to do that, let's say within an affluent nation within the United States, it's going to take X amount of resources will impact a relatively small group. But if we're talking about using the exact same resources to help a community in sub-Saharan Africa, where the need is so much greater, for one, just the need to prevent death, to sustain life, to nourish and nurture individuals and provide health and opportunity, the need is so much greater. But also because of the exchange rate and the strength of the US dollar, it's going to stretch so much further in Rwanda, Uganda, Somalia, Kenya, etc., and not just in Africa, but in many parts of Asia, in South America, in Central America, and throughout the world. There are just some organizations that are far more effective at doing good than others, and those have been evaluated and scrutinized and looked at based on lots of different principles and criteria. And then we can come away with some sort of solution and realize that, for example, is it better in your perspective to help those who are in a life or death situation in Africa, or to why not use your funds, a finite amount, limited amount that you have, to donate to the arts of the local museum that only benefits affluent people in the Western world? What's a more important use of those funds? I think we can all decide that, well, there's those who are literally going to die, 800 million starving people at the moment worldwide, 2 billion food insecure, and that's just people. We get all the animals that are in trouble as well. But instead, maybe we decide to donate to our local library, or museum, or some sort of place that benefits a very small amount of people and is not a life or death situation, but is usually catering to an affluent group who has access to these amenities. So that's what effective altruism is about, is doing the most good. And so what I created is effective vegan altruism, because I read all these books on effective altruism. And yes, of course, Peter Singer, who's kind of known as the father of the animal rights movement with his animal liberation book in the 1970s and some of his other work he's done for the last 50 years or so, they touched on helping animals a little bit, but almost all of these books are about helping people. And I just figured these are proven principles. They work. You can evaluate who's suffering the most and to what degree, and the cost to alleviate that suffering, like a dollar amount. For example, I talked about in the book, you can spare a chicken's life for as little as 33 cents. I mean, that's having some of those tangible, measurable metrics and statistics can help guide our behavior. And so I wanted to look into the idea about most effectively helping animals. And as I'm sure we'll touch on a little bit later, that has a lot to do with removing our personal biases, our regional biases, our tendencies to think of our own community first. In almost all cases, we think about ourselves, our family, our city or town, our state, our country. We have all this local, regional bias and pride, and for good reason, and for reasons we can all associate with and recognize, being proud of where we come from, and the situations we've been brought up in, and all that kind of stuff. But that doesn't mean we can objectively look at this and determine that our resources, our time, our energy could be more effectively spent elsewhere, depending on our individual geographical region. And that's one of the things that I'm encouraging people to do with the Impactful Vegan is to set biases aside, look at the big picture globally. And if I have $100 that I can use, maybe that's all I've got that I'm willing to part with to help animals, is it best to help the local dog or cat or other domesticated animal here in my hometown? Or is this better to go help prevent immense suffering in factory farming operations in the developing world? And I think there's compelling evidence to suggest that we should look outside of our country's borders and see how we can do the most good elsewhere while still feeling good about what we're doing and that we are making a difference.
So I think some thoughts that percolate to myself and others would be, you're just saying broaden your perspective. And then I would say let your heart tell you where you need to go, as long as you fully looked at the full elephant, so to speak. That reminds me of a story where, there are 5 blind men and they're all touching an elephant, and they all describe the elephant based on their limited perspective of what they could feel. And of course, they miss the big picture. So you're saying step back, look at the big picture, but then I would say let that person's inner wisdom of where they're feeling called to actually donate time or money or resources, because sometimes it's feeding the altruistic buyer, so to speak, is seeing it work in your own local chapter. But then again, you never know where that will grow. So from the standpoint of what you've seen on the broader picture, what are some of the highlights that we should be paying attention to help us understand it's not just our local animal shelter? We should be, just thinking about like what else is going on. Can you give us a kind of a landscape overview?
Yeah, I think one thing to recognize is that there are organizations that have spent decades and decades and decades determining how to most effectively use their resources to reduce animal suffering, and realize there's a lot that we don't know, and many times what we don't know can get in our way. And so we do have some of these preferences or biases, and maybe they do inspire us on a local or regional level. And I have some of that as well with a local animal sanctuary, Love and Arms, for example. But I also step back and see all the stuff they do on a bigger scale. I see that they have 5,000 people from the general public come out for a single event, like their carnival or fall festival had over 5,000 people. I've been to many of those such events, and I go to them throughout the year. I see their focus on education. I see how effective they are at fundraising. I think that was the last time I saw you in person.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yep. I was on their board
event.
for a couple
Right,
of years. Yeah.
we raised over $200,000 in a single evening in a matter of hours. I actually wrote about that in the book because I contributed. I didn't have a lot of money, but I contributed all these products and resources that were within my network that people bid on at an auction and raised thousands of dollars. So I have some of those regional preferences as well. But I think what we have to do is just to step back and realize that there are organizations that have years and years of experience, trial and error, lessons learned. They have wealthy donors. They have access to additional funds. They have relationships with, in some cases, like the Humane League, relationships with like literally thousands of food producers, and can have an impact on the supply and demand and influence of what kind of foods are produced, and they're doing their best to reduce animals in the food supply chain, and they have a bunch of statistics to show that through their partnerships. And they also work on other things like education, which helps spare animal lives, like I said, for chickens for as little as 33 cents, making it stretch really, really far if you're thinking of donating to an organization like that. Also think about other things that many of us, it may not cross our radar, but I had an actual FaceTime, phone conversation with a monk in Sri Lanka who's connected with parliament, with their local government. And he basically single-handedly, and we had this conversation, prevented 100,000 primates from being deported to China to be used in animal testing. I can't do that, right? I can't do that. I'm not connected to parliament in this part of the world where animals are used in massive numbers in some very, very heavily, densely populated areas. But some of these organizations, this was through Dharma Voices for Animals, for example, the only Buddhist animal rights organization in the world, one that, at least a global organization, a Buddhist animal rights organization. And that's how I connected to this monk. Again, I wrote about him briefly in the book, like just a few sentences. But these are accomplishments that many of us are unable to do on our own. But when we provide the resources to these organizations, we're so well connected with local governments in whatever country that is, with perhaps influential people or celebrities or those who have the ability to persuade large audiences in their native language, in their native country, or quite simply, when you collaborate with and connect with and support international organizations. And sometimes that makes people a little bit squeamish. Like I'm afraid of my money leaving the U.S. system because I don't know where it goes after that. There's this fear that's maybe unwarranted, or maybe there's just this inherent worry about it's out of sight, out of mind, what's really happening. But many of these international organizations are also based in the U.S. or have a U.S. office or even originated here, but facilitate programs throughout the world, like Mercy for Animals, for example. And so I think there's this, to your point, this step back, this overview of there's a lot that we don't know, and there's a lot going on behind the scenes and campaigns and working on policy changes and all of that, legislative changes that impact, in some cases, hundreds of millions of animals at a time. Like California Proposition 12, I interviewed Josh Balk for the book about that, or maybe even impacts billions of animals. And I think recognizing that the power that these organizations have for influence is greater than our own individual abilities. And so if we can support them and allow them to flourish, like what the Good Food Institute is doing right now, to try to change the way meat is made, like to literally change the system in the next 10 or 15 years, where animals are just not part of the equation. We use all kinds of other methods like cultivated meat, precision fermentation, plant-based meats, which are now a multi-billion-dollar industry and continuing to grow globally. Getting some resources into those innovative companies that are already working with foreign governments, who are already working on all these different things. 1,300, probably more now, but in my book, 1,300 different companies working on cultivated meat globally as we speak. This is forward thinking, this is futuristic, and this is how we can make a difference with our resources right now. And that's really, Laurie, one of the points, is that whether we like it or not, and I don't really love it, but whether we like it or not, our donations and contributions are far more effective than our actions. And I'll repeat that, because so much of it we take on personal accountability and responsibility, that my actions, how I vote with my dollars, what I buy and don't buy, what I support, etc. But our donations and contributions are far more effective and impactful than our actions. I have infographics that show this in the book. That one last summary on that. The average vegan, or the typical vegan, spares about 300 animal lives per year. Pretty amazing. But if you were to donate just 5% of your annual income, that based on the median income for the American adult, you would spare something like 7,500 to 8,000 animal lives per year. Just saying, you know what, I'm not going to buy that new jacket or backpack, or maybe go to that movie or get that expensive coffee, or play at the casino or whatever. And I'm going to allocate this into a giving bucket, impactful bucket. And at the end of the year, now I spared nearly 10,000 animal lives instead of just a few hundred. And that's the power of contribution.
So you're just amplifying your dollar, basically, is what you're saying. But I like that impactful bucket. That's a really cool, I love that. So put
Yeah.
it, and it could be fun too to actually start building this, way of living with your own family. If you have children, putting an impactful bucket, let's let them decide what they want to donate to at the end of the year and set that aside, and, let them put their change and dollars into it as well. So I think that's a really cool way to look at it. So, jumping to kind of another piece here, that the chapter is called Fueling Your Advocacy. When you find your why, you'll find your way, which is fantastic. Can you speak to a little bit about that and what that chapter entails? Because I think that might help people clarify where they would like to put their, either time donations or other activities or interests.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it comes down to uh, why do you care in the first place? I ask lots of questions in that chapter, a lot of scenarios. When you see suffering, how does it make you feel? And then when you see, in this case, I use animals, but when you see animals being helped or saved or rescued or flourishing or getting a second chance, how does that make you feel? And what do you feel moved to support? Do you feel moved to support exploitation and cruelty, and do you want to kind of join in on that act? Or do you feel moved to prevent it or to celebrate the freedom and the desire that all beings have to live a life free of fear, pain, and suffering? And how does that move you to take action? That moved me. I raised animals on a farm that I would bottle feed baby calves before getting on the school bus every day, only to raise these calves to then sell them at the auction to be turned into someone else's meal and say goodbye to them. And thanks for trusting me, but you're off to a different part of your life now, which is going to be the end of it. That caused me to change my behavior as a teenager. And I said, I'm going to dedicate, I didn't know then, the rest of my life to helping animals and doing that effectively. That is my why, and I found my way through fitness, through athleticism, through building my body in order to lead by example and show people they could do the same. And it had a net positive result on sparing animal lives, on encouraging other people to adopt a vegan lifestyle, to change their worldview and perspective. And most importantly, and again, it's kind of a bummer to say this, but most importantly, habit change. And I say that's a bummer because a lot of vegans will talk about changing hearts and minds, but we have to go beyond that because hearts and minds change. Vegan recidivism is high and it's real and it's unfortunate. And I don't even want to share the statistics, but it's way over half, way more than half of the people who identify as vegans will go back and no longer be vegan. So we can't just change hearts and minds. We have to change menus and meal plans. We have to change habits. That even I have plenty of friends who are not vegan, but because of my influence, they eat a predominantly plant-based diet. They eat a mostly plant-based diet. They spare animals every single day when they choose not to eat them for these particular meals because I've been able to show them how to do that or lead by example or influence them in some way. Sure, plenty of people who have read my books have gone fully vegan, and that's great, and all of that. But these whys will change, these perspectives will change. But if we can cultivate these habits that will hopefully stick with us for the long haul, those still have positive implications. And so once we establish our why and get really clear about it, and I ask a bunch of questions in order to determine that, then create basically what I call the vegan Kaizen system of small incremental steps toward forward improvement to cultivate these habits that stay with us. For example, uh, you may have some New Year's resolutions, Laurie. I'm not sure. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe some of your clients do, maybe they don't. But the fact is, a lot of people do. So you have your why, right? This is my year. This is my year to lose the weight, to gain the muscle, to reverse this disease, to be an inspiration to my mother or my father or my partner or my children, whatever the case is. And so you cultivate this routine, this exercise routine. You stick with it for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Oh man, now my why is something else. It's spring, it's summer. I lost the momentum or motivation, or I simply have new goals. I don't need to feel like this is my year and all this stuff. But I've built up these exercise habits, so hopefully those stay even when our mental shift says, you know what, now I want to do something different with a New Year's resolution the following year. But we've built up these habits that stuck with us and will carry us through and keep us going in strong physical health, even when our perspectives shift. And so what I'm hoping is that people will find some sort of altruistic why, some sort of just thoughtful caring and, and giving and wanting to help animals, whether they identify as vegan or not, and will use that to fuel their behavior toward animals. You could donate to organizations. You could volunteer at various places to help animals. You can donate resources or assets. You could offer your skills and talents, and allow that to be this foundation that makes a difference, even as you kind of slither through life and change perspectives on how you identify and what labels you identify with. But many behaviors will stick for a long time, even as we swap labels throughout our life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that the why is very important, especially when it gets hard to maintain the momentum of changing your lifestyle or changing your diet or whatever you want to be working on. And certainly I think the average New Year's resolution lasts 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Because people really, honestly, I think a few things, they try to change too quickly, too much. And two, their why was not their true why. It was a more of a superficial, but we really do need to go deep. And so I see patients who are very ill, chronic disease, and kind of at their rope's end, and they have motivation because they're trying to move away from pain. But I think even excluding movement from pain is moving towards something that really pulls you emotionally, the compassion. Because I think one thing about vegans, I think they're more empathetic, right? So they see suffering and they really can connect to that suffering. Then they become very emotionally charged to be vegan activists and stuff. And so I guess my question to you with that piece is, sometimes when we approach people, let's say that we want to be, besides, just quietly sending in our donations, if we want to share, this is what I'm doing, this is the work I'm doing, how do you approach someone who maybe is not necessarily anti-vegan, but cautious of vegans because of kind of the stereotypical vegan story that we hear about, or where the jokes come from? And we kind of laugh because, sometimes they're kind of true in the stereotypical way. But so how can we approach, sharing what we're doing? Because people do get excited, this is what I'm doing, or trying to understand that pulling the judgment out of someone who maybe doesn't necessarily see what you're doing in the same way. How do you have those difficult conversations with people who don't necessarily see things the way you do?
I think you ask questions. I think you ask thoughtful questions. So when people are skeptical or they're critical or whatever, you just start asking them questions like, do you care about animals, or do you feel like they deserve to not suffer, and why? And have you had the opportunity to connect with various animals? Do you have pets, for example? What's that relationship like with them? Because one of the least effective things we can do is just have these combative arguments with people where nobody's listening, no one's asking thoughtful questions. And Paul Shapiro put it beautifully in the book. One of the dozens of people I interviewed for the book and told their stories, where he says we can't simply win arguments with non-vegans. We have to win them over. So let's say you're not vegan, Laurie, and I'm pretty critical of you, so I'm just going to kind of be combative with you. I'm probably going to judge you very directly, maybe even a little bit of name calling, probably raising my voice and my energy and all this kind of stuff. How likely are you to be totally receptive to that and say, you know what? I want to be part of that team. I want to join that angry, yelling, shouting, condemning kind of team. My guess is highly unlikely. Highly unlikely. I've spent 30 years in this environment. I come from a farming background. My family are farmers. My brother runs a multi-million-dollar cattle operation. We've had these conversations for decades. But asking thoughtful questions, sharing what's important to you and why it's important without being combative, it can be far more effective. And I'm the first person to understand and recognize that there's immense animal suffering happening every second of every day, and we need to take action and all of that. I get it. But again, that's what this book is about. Some actions are far more effective than others. So I have this entire section about the vegan Kaizen system. Now, Kaizen is a Japanese word for small incremental steps to improvement and being open to feedback and suggestions and recommendations. And it's always small steps. It's not an overnight change. It's not a cold turkey. It's not an all or nothing. It's designed to be a system that leads to long-lasting change, where you have the opportunity for actions and habits to adapt and be instilled within your behavior. If people with New Year's resolutions would follow the Kaizen system, they would be far more successful, rather than going hard for 2 weeks, burning out, and saying, I'll try again next year. In fact, I think I reference this in the book too. The average person has the same New Year's resolution for 10 consecutive years, a decade of their life, before they decide, you know what, maybe this is not for me. It's just not in the cards for me. I got to do something different. But with Kaizen, and I just added the word vegan to it and changed it a little bit in my own perspective, the vegan Kaizen system is saying we've got to understand where people are at, what their worldview is, the environment they grew up in, what they hold dear to themselves, what their religious beliefs are, what their cultural beliefs are, what their economic situation is, where they are in relation to the world and access to various foods and economic resources and options and all of these things, and then make some deliberate, calculated, small incremental steps to incorporating this into a long-lasting lifestyle that can carry someone through the long haul throughout their life. And so I think asking questions and listening is one of the best things we can do for those who are not on the same page as us. And also, it's cliche to say it, but leading by positive example. That's who do we look up to oftentimes? Now, I know not in every case, especially sometimes in politics, it can get messy, but in most cases of athletes or entertainers or artists or teachers or leaders, we aspire to be like those we view as role models who lead by positive example. more often than those who lead by poor example. And so I think we can be that example. And that's what I've tried to do as a plant-based athlete. And that's what I've tried to do with my books. That's what I try to do with my presentations, or how I carry myself and be healthy, happy, and fit, and be encouraging rather than discouraging, by lifting others up rather than pushing others away, by being inclusive rather than exclusive. And I think that matters. So you're not going to win everybody over, especially family and loved ones and the closest people to you. But you can go to those who are on the fence, those who are the low hanging fruit, who are already interested in plant based diet or veganism, or those who already, maybe omnivores who volunteer at animal shelters, those who care about animals already, and who will be up in arms when a lion is shot, or when these poachers and big game hunters are out killing rhinos. And even though people are literally eating cows and pigs and baby lambs off their plates, they still care about animals to some degree. And we can harness that without being too critical of the hypocrisy of their actions, but support their positive actions, and where they might be willing to give more of their time, energy, resources, or even step back and see the broader picture and recognize that there's not a whole lot of difference between the rhinos and the lions and the giraffes and the cows and the lambs and the pigs and the hens, and take that conversation wherever it might go. But ultimately, it comes back to meeting people where they're at, asking questions, and listening.
No, I think that's great. I think also it's really important to be careful and just choose your battles, because it's like raising a child, right? You can choose to make life more difficult than it need be. So, but you can address people where their levers are, kind of like you said, meeting them where they're at. So maybe it's their health is impaired. It's like, hey, eating more plants will help you healthy, but you also help, maybe it's the climate, or also speak to the animal piece, because sometimes people get really standoffish just the mention of the word vegan. So often I don't even ever identify myself as vegan, even though I truly have the ethical component to that. I understand that. I just say I'm plant-based, because that will leave the door open for more conversation. And comment from the health point, it does make sense. I'm a doctor, but that is another thing, is just maybe see how can you enter into a conversation that will be the least offensive component. I think that's an easy way to engage with folks, and just agree to enter the conversation, and again, not hold judgment on basically on what they're saying. I think us withholding judgment is so critical because the moment we become defensive, they become defensive, because they're already going to be on the defense, because you're coming from a standpoint of like, what you're doing maybe not be ethically mindful. It's like, so that's how at least people have approached me, which I think is really interesting. It's a great way to just to engage in life. But I guess my question also would be, you speak to a few different things of, if you can explain this, I think it'll be interesting, because when I saw this title in your table of contents, I was really curious. So, Faunalytics and the Path Toward Impact. So can you speak to what that is exactly?
Yeah, so Faunalytics is an amazing organization, a nonprofit animal charity organization that has the biggest animal survey data research database in the world, research library in the world. Surveys, studies, thousands of them. You can get lost in there for months. And they're also one of the animal charity evaluators recipients of one of the most impactful animal organizations in the world. After 3,000 different organizations have been evaluated, they've been one of the top 4, at least for 2022. I don't remember for 2023. So Faunalytics has conducted some really interesting surveys to find out what motivations lead people to becoming vegan or being interested in veganism, and changing their philosophy and changing their perspectives and all of that. And some of the results were predictable. Some were a bit surprising. And I dedicated a section in the book to that because, for example, there's a lot of things that they get attention. Uh, Celebrities, for example, and their perceived influence, which, spoiler alert, is actually not that significant, believe it or not. They're just not. They're not early adopters. They wait to see what their audience is already open to before they post something that could get them in trouble with their own audience. They're very sensitive to that. They can help come in and push a movement to a tipping point, but they're certainly not leaders or innovators, and they're not grassroots organizers or community activists. They're not as influential as we think they are. Other things too that are common, billboards and things like that. You see them all throughout Hollywood, which is where I'm going to be tomorrow. Again, they're not that effective. They're just not. When you look at what the surveys say, that doesn't bring non-vegans into the fold. It might be something that makes vegans feel empowered and pat ourselves on the back. And how cool is that to see? And it's fun. And I admit I take photos, and it's cool to see these billboards. Cool that celebrities are embracing this, but it doesn't make that big of a difference. So what makes the biggest difference? I'm not going to have people wait to read the book. I'll tell you. News articles tend to be one of the most influential pieces of marketing material for a movement or an idea, to get ideas to spread and get ideas to stick. News articles tend to be something that are the most influential in getting people to change their behavior. News articles and news stories. I mean, that's even what brought Earthling Ed into veganism, when he saw on the news on the BBC this massive truck, must have been one of those like 2 or 3 trailers of these massive semis, carrying 7,000 chickens crashed, and 1,500 chickens died on impact. Others had their parts of their face ripped off, wings and legs ripped off, and he was a total non-vegan. He had dead chickens in his refrigerator from KFC, but he saw that news story, and for the first time ever, he felt empathetic or sympathetic or sad for those animals suffering. Looked in his refrigerator, saw that he had chickens in there. He was a major supporter of KFC. They knew his order by when he walked in the door. They knew what he wanted, and that changed his life. And he's now one of the biggest voices for veganism in the world. That's just one. Many such examples. What your neighbor, your patients, strangers you meet on the street, people you see. I was at the grocery store yesterday and saw people with a whole bunch of plant-based and vegan foods. Made small talk with them at the checkout. Many of those people were impacted by news stories or articles, or even letters to the editor, opinion letters, that kind of stuff. Something that caught their attention in some sort of authoritative platform, television, print media, newspaper, magazine, radio, that still do have a strong influence on people. And there's things like challenges, like Veganuary, highly effective because you're getting people in a supportive environment to change their behavior over a certain amount of time. And that allows them to get accustomed to it and used to it and all of that. And they're supported by hundreds of thousands of people who are doing the same thing in the same program, doing the same challenge, with online community groups and support and all that. And then, Laurie, and I know I'm going to get a little bit of backlash for this, and that's okay, because you have to follow the data. You have to follow the evidence.
Right.
There are some things that are not very effective, like a lot of the direct action protests, like throwing red paint on fur jackets, getting megaphones and shouting at people in grocery stores. And I've been part of some of this in the past as well. And what it does is a couple things. Number one, it empowers those who are doing it. Like, look at me being a voice for the voiceless. Like, look at me being hardcore, a dedicated animal rights activist. Look, I'm shouting at people. I'm yelling at them. I'm criticizing them. I'm demanding they change. I'm calling them names. I'm making a big disruption. I'm bringing attention to myself and those work with me. But what it also does is it very strongly, based on survey data, it strongly pushes omnivores away from veganism. Much like, again, not exactly the same, but what city was I in recently? Just recently. I think it was in Salem, Oregon, actually. And there was someone holding religious signs and screaming on the street with a megaphone. And I wasn't compelled to go sign up and subscribe to be part of the community. I thought that's not actually someone I want to stay away from. My wife and I were shopping. Let's maybe not go based on the nature of their behavior. We wanted to disassociate ourselves with that individual. Well, wanted nothing to do with them. And vegans are often blinded by that because they think they're doing, whatever, the Lord's work in promoting veganism, but they're often alienating a lot of people. Yet they get a lot of pats on the back for doing so, for holding signs, for screaming, for yelling, for throwing red paint, for blocking access to the meat or dairy section, for yelling at people, how dare you, you're a murderer, all this stuff. You're not going to get a lot of those people signing up to be the next vegans. It just doesn't work. Data, survey results show that's ineffective and, in fact, in some cases harmful. Because what it does for people is it says, some omnivores, they put this in surveys, they say, I'm actually compelled to go eat more animals now because I'm so bothered, I'm so turned off by, I'm so offended by these militant type vegans. At the same time, I realize there's a passionate group. I've been part of it. I've done marches. I've held signs. I've done some things. There's a passionate group that is trying like heck to make a difference for the lives of animals. My argument is simply that there's some more effective ways of doing that. Leading by example, having conversations. I think the Vegan Strong method, which is one of my favorite chapters in the book, is overlooked. And that alone could be highly effective if people would embrace it.
So can you describe a little bit further what the Vegan Strong method is?
Yeah. So the Vegan Strong method is, I co-founded this organization called Vegan Strong to go around to the largest fitness conventions in the world. Some have 250,000 people, like the one last week, the Arnold Schwarzenegger Classic, 250,000 to 300,000. Most have 50,000, 25,000. We have a presence there of champion vegan bodybuilders leading by example, showing in real world form you can build your body on a plant-based diet. But most importantly, we pass out about 25,000 plant-based products per event to the tune of 125,000 per year. So what we're doing, and anybody can do this in your own household, in your family, within your church or community, or sports or coaching or whatever you're part of. Basically, I know it sounds like a strange concept. Basically, what I'm encouraging people to do is to purchase or acquire plant-based products and give them to omnivores to replace the foods they would normally eat, to impact supply and demand of their purchase power. I do this for my friend. I shipped him a box yesterday. It's his birthday tomorrow. He's not totally vegan. He's close, not totally there. But if it's up to him, he'll drink whey protein. He'll do whey protein drinks. He's into fitness. Casein protein drinks, whey protein bars. He'll have fish. He'll have chicken, whatever. But because I supply him with all the products he needs, because I leverage another part of Vegan Strong is working with all these different companies. I currently work with 150 different plant-based companies. So I get all these products donated that then I redistribute. I give them out to people. I sell them as well, including on tour, so that people opt in. They're not just getting something for free that they'll dismiss and throw away or whatever. But we encourage people to invest by selling at a low price point, like $20 to buy $100 worth of plant-based sports nutrition products. It's a no-brainer. People can't say no to it. We did $10,000 in sales in a single weekend at a recent expo to 99% non-vegan audience who now stock their pantry, their kitchen countertop with plant-based products that will last them for months, which also develops these habits that makes them more likely when it's time to purchase something to pick that plant-based one rather than the whey protein, the casein, whatever. So my friend, he basically, I get a lot of these products for free. Doesn't cost me anything except for shipping, or I haul them in my suitcase and then I see him. And he's just one person. I do this for many, many, many people. But my friend, I supply him with all the sports nutrition products he could want. So he's never buying these animal-based products, whether it's powders or bars or snacks, even little like plant-based cheese ball snacks, all these types of things. But we can do that for our own individual households, for our roommates, for our friends, for our parents. I do that when I go home and visit my parents. I'm in charge of getting the food for the household during the time that I'm back. Therefore, I ensure that everyone's eating plant-based stuff. Yeah, there's a little bit of an outgoing cost, but it's similar to if you're donating money to organizations, or if you're, donating this or that, or you're purchasing vegan restaurant food to support vegan restaurants. This Vegan Strong method simply states you lead by positive example, you answer questions that are asked of you about your vegan lifestyle, and you supply people with quality plant-based foods to offset the animal-based foods they would typically have, to replace them, actually, to replace those foods. And what we found, I've been doing this for 5 years with Vegan Strong, and before that in other capacities, is that many people provide feedback that because they were able to try this vegan jerky instead of an animal-based jerky, a plant-based protein powder instead of another one, that they decided to incorporate that into their everyday lives. And so we can quantify these numbers, and I have an entire chapter breaking down all these numbers of how many animals are spared as a result. And it's incredibly effective. And so when you go to community event, you're bringing, whether it's potluck type food, or you're in charge of bringing the snack for your son's soccer team or whatever. These are all opportunities to bring cruelty-free items for everybody to enjoy. One year, Laurie, believe it or not, I distributed $100,000 worth of Beyond Meat coupons in an entire year, largely at these fitness expos. Some of them were free product coupons that people are not going to throw away. I mean, that saves you $10. Of course you're going to do it. It makes economic sense. They're going to go, it's a manufacturer coupon. In fact, I have them right here. I have these, stacks of free coupons because it's part of my advocacy. I want to get these into the hands of people who would normally be buying animals and give them something they can do instead. This is another way we vote and say, now the grocery store determines how many chickens they sold, how much bologna, how many hot dogs, how many frozen animals they sold, compared to now the demand is increased for all of these plant-based meats or whatever. We're going to order more of those, fewer of the animals. We're going to highlight those in the store. There's all these things that can make a difference. And I believe that introducing people to plant-based foods in so many ways, from conventions and a plant-based by default or greener by default approach, to ballroom, catering events, to your local church or community sports team, or your school, or when you're traveling, or with your friends or family, it really does add up, because you're saying to your friends, you don't need to spend that money to pay for someone to slaughter that animal, because you're buying plants instead. And on the macro supply and demand scale, it adds up if enough people are doing it.
Mm-hmm. No, and I like that idea. So, the next birthday, Christmas gift, whatever gift or potluck, I think it's nice to bring the plant-based, animal-free products to whomever, but also even just writing a note of, these are all plant-based products or vegan products, and this is how it's made such an impact on my life, and I wanted to give this to you. And not with the judgment, just sharing your own story. And people will resonate with that too, when you put that a little bit of emotion and thought into it, and sharing why you're doing this and how you hope that they can see some benefit as well. So I think that's a beautiful a way to share veganism, and the true reason why people do it is really just to decrease suffering in other sentient beings. So I think this is, I know, kept you to the hour, but I'm hoping, Robert, is there any final words you'd like to share to the audience besides go buy the book when it's out in June?
Well, thanks, Laurie, for the opportunity today. I know this book is a lot. It covers, I mean, you saw the table of contents. It covers a lot of stuff, but it's the best book I've ever written. It's better than my New York Times bestseller, The Plant-Based Athlete. I know so. I've read it over many times. The entire team worked on this for 2.5 years. The last thing I would say is one of the core themes in the book is determine our strong V characteristics. Those are our skills, talents, resources, other strengths, network, generosity, and volunteering. And if you take that chapter to heart, if you embrace strong V and everything that it has to offer and put your best skills forward, your best talents forward, leverage your network and resources, you can make an incredible impact for animals, and you could change and save and spare the lives of others simply by slightly altering your daily activities to lean into your strengths and to give in an altruistic way and allow that to fuel your enthusiasm and your passion for wanting to make a difference in the world around you. And when you do that and you lead by that kind of positive example, that invites other people to want to do what you're doing too. And that's how we grow this movement to pretty soon 100 million people worldwide who identify as vegan or plant-based or compassionate towards animals. And that's really what I'm encouraging people to do. You don't have to be vegan to make a difference. The book is called The Impactful Vegan, but really it's about reducing suffering. And I think I lay out a very compelling case to do it. And it's actually just a really enjoyable read as well. It's not a doom and gloom. It's not graphic. There's not, all these stories of animal abuse or anything like that. It's very uplifting, very encouraging, and it just shows people how to be as impactful as you can be.
No, I think that's fantastic. So yeah, you're absolutely, there's a lot in here. It's a lot more than you can cover in an hour. So you guys definitely check out the book. This is fantastic as always, Robert. So thank you for taking the time to write it and being moved to share ways that people can also reduce suffering locally and afar, and encourage people to think in a broader perspective. So thank you for your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for the platform for me to share today.